good morning and welcome back to the vlog. It is Sunday morning and I am about to head out to harvest the garlic and shallots because I think they are ready to pull out of the ground. But before I do that, I wanted to catch you up on what you were just watching. So yesterday I had gone antiquing. I found a dresser that I really liked that I wanted to use as a TV stand, but while I was there, the owner of the booth was not around to negotiate pricing. So I gave them my number and I was like, if she gets back to you, let me know, and I'll come back and pick it up. Of course, I got home 30 minutes later, they called me and they were like, yep, she's good with the price. And so I turned around, got in the car, and went back to pick it up. First, Matt and I had to make a little modification to make it work as a TV stand because it's a dresser, so it wasn't designed for this purpose. So I'm gonna show you what we did, and maybe this will give you some ideas on how you can repurpose furniture for uses other than what it was originally intended for. So this is the dresser I purchased. It came with 3 drawers, and because we wanted sort of like a shelf space where we could tuck things in without having to open and close a drawer, we had to convert that top space into a shelf. And when you pull the drawer out, obviously there's no bottom. So what we did was we cut this thin brown board, which I actually had extra of in the barn because I had previously used this for another project to build a chalkboard. It's a really smooth surface, and I chose this material for a couple of reasons. 1, we already had it on hand. 2, it's relatively thin, so it wouldn't be like a big chunky ledge sitting here. And then 3, it's dark, so I didn't even have to cut and stain wood. This just blends in really nicely, and from afar it just looks like a dark shelf. You can see up close here, there are these 2 pegs in the front, and that's used to kind of stop the drawer when you use the drawer, so it doesn't keep pushing further in, it stops flush with the front. Because of that, we had to cut out these little notches so it would still have the support on this front edge, but fit around these pegs. So we just used the multi-tool and cut a little notch out. And then in the back, underneath here, we screwed a block of wood so that the back edge of this shelf actually has something to rest on, because there was nothing along the back there that would support it, so it would just kind of dip and wouldn't support anything on top. With those few modifications, we now have a shelf, which is awesome, and this piece easily pops out and we can slide the drawer right back in place if we ever wanted to reuse this as a dresser or sell it or whatever. One of the reasons I really wanted a dresser is because I wanted drawers to hide things, and I like to think outside the box, and dressers are a great storage piece. So in these drawers I've got my workout mat and my foam roller, and then down here we keep the Xbox, the games, and the Switch mount here. So that allows us to easily access these items but tuck them away because they're not very pretty, and I like things clean and hidden from sight. If I pull this drawer all the way out, you can see the cords kind of go under here. Now these drawers, when you push them all the way in, there's about 2 inches of space behind the drawer, which works out perfectly for this scenario because we can run the cords down the back of the drawer and then underneath the dresser to plug in. So I didn't even notice that when I purchased this. I was fully expecting that we would need to cut holes in the back like a lot of TV stands have, but that ended up working out perfectly. So if you do something like this, test out your drawers, because you might actually be able to find something that minimizes what you have to modify in order to convert, a dresser into a TV stand. Now switching gears to the shallots and garlic. I'm gonna walk out to the back bed and we're basically gonna pull everything out of the ground. In order to store these properly, they need to be cured first. So when I get out there, I'll kind of walk you through the process. This is my first year doing it, so we're learning together. But I've done a little bit of reading and I think I generally have the idea, so we'll give it a go and see how this works. Okay, first things first. I brought a few things out here with me to assist. I have a little hand shovel, I've got clean shears, and I have these plastic baskets that I will use to collect everything. I just saved these from something I got at a garden center this year, and they're great because they're not solid, so they're perfect for curing and storing. This just allows air to flow through. They're not sort of compact in there. So I just have a whole stack of them. When I do store them, I will rotate them on top of each other so that they can just kind of stack like that. So if you are buying plants this year and you happen to get a whole tray of something, make sure you save these plastic containers because they do come in handy for other gardening tasks. So to harvest the garlic, you can see here that the leaves have started to yellow. And that is a sign that the garlic is ready to harvest. Now, you don't want the plant to be completely dead, and you don't want it to be completely green. If it's still green, it's still growing, so you want to wait until it starts to die off. Then you can pull them out of the ground. As a reminder, I have grown hardneck garlic. I think the process is pretty similar, but just keep that in mind. If you've grown softneck, do a little bit of research and make sure however you're harvesting them is correct for that variety. So I'm just gonna gently pull one out of the ground. I'll show you what it looks like and how I'm going to prep it to cure it. So I've just slowly yanked it up. You don't want to like rip it out of the ground, just kind of like slowly put pressure and it'll eventually work itself out. You can see the bottom here is the bulb of garlic that we've grown, and then the top here are all the leaves. And you can see even more closely that these ones on the end are all starting to yellow. So that was a sign to me that they're ready to pull up. In order to prep these for curing, all I'm going to do is find the first green leaf. So this one here is yellow and dying, so I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to find the first green one from the base. Then I'm going to hold that and just slowly peel it down. And you can see that that is going to reveal a nice clean head of garlic underneath. Now, you want to avoid washing these. So by finding that first green leaf, peeling it down and sort of removing all of the dirty layers, you are basically cleaning your garlic without even having to use water. The water adds moisture, which can cause problems when it comes to curing and drying for storage. So I've stripped that all down, and now my bulb looks perfectly clean. I will clip the roots off here at the end, and I'm gonna clip this stalk so that there's about 6 inches left above the bulb of garlic. So this right here is a bulb that's prepared for curing. Now what I'll do is I'll just lay these out in my tray as I pull them out of the ground and prep them. And then we will place this in a dry location for the next 3 weeks. You don't want it to be humid, you don't want it to be wet, you don't want to do it in the sun. All of those factors can cause problems with the curing, and you want to make sure you cure these well because that will elongate the amount of time that they can be stored. Now that we're done with garlic, we're going to move on to shallots. So these are similar, where if they're kind of starting to flop over and you can see the bulbs from the ground here, they're ready to harvest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shovel and kind of just loosen the soil up around it to pull them out. I don't want to break them at all. Now these, I'm just going to shake as much of the dirt off as possible and then put them in a crate. These also need to cure, but I don't think you want to remove all of like the paper and the stems. I think those are okay to leave on for curing. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen all these up, pull them out, put them in the crate, and then I'll show you what we're left with. As you can see by my very pink cheeks, it is extremely hot and humid out. So I'm glad that we're done. All the garlic and shallots are harvested. The garlic is all cleaned and the tops have been cut off. The shallots have all been separated into individual little onions so that they can cure that way. Technically for the garlic, you can actually leave the tops on. A lot of people will braid them together and hang them to dry, but I was reading that sometimes that can be problematic and they won't actually fully dry out and you can have some mold problems. So I figured I'm just gonna try it this way. If it doesn't work out well, or if we do end up having problems with this method, we can try something different next year. Honestly, a lot of this will probably be used over the next several weeks, so we won't actually be storing all of it, but whatever's left once it's fully cured, then we can actually store it and see how long it lasts. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I will try to answer as best I can, and I will keep you posted and let you know if I have to make any changes over the next few weeks as things are curing. But right now, I am going to go shower because I feel disgusting. From the garden. It's Friday. A whole week has gone by and I have been making lots of great progress on office sketches and planning, but it's been super boring, and I'm finally ready to share with you how I calculate materials. But before we do that later today, I need to do a little bit of garden cleanup. It's been a really hot week and I just have not wanted to get out here in the middle of the day, so I've been trying to use my mornings to get the gardening tasks done. And what I want to do today is just clean up any spent plants. So some things I'm waiting to go to seed, like the arugula and the spinach and the cilantro back here. They're getting there. I'm seeing the little seed pods develop, but we just have to wait a little bit longer until those totally dry up and we can actually harvest the seeds. But there are some things like the second succession of radishes I planted, the bok choy, and probably a few other things that just got eaten and are just looking sad. So what I'm gonna do is a method called chop and drop. You just take your shears, you clip everything at the roots, and you chop everything up into little pieces, and you just drop it right on top of the soil. That's a really good way of introducing the nutrients back into your beds. And for us, because we have the jumping worms, it's also a method of preventing the spread of cocoons. If I pull everything up by the roots and then I, put it in the compost, there's a good chance there are cocoons wrapped up in there, and then we're spreading worms all over the place. So this just keeps everything contained and tidy. So we are gonna get this done before the sun gets too hot, and then later today we'll catch up on office updates. So as you can see, that was a very easy job. I just clipped everything at the roots, chopped it into bits and pieces, and laid it across the top here. And this will just eventually dry up and break down and incorporate itself back into the soil. You can see over in this bed here, I actually did that where we had all the collard greens and lettuce. I chopped it all up, and these are some remains. It's just dried up and almost all of it has been broken down. So it's a really easy way to clean up your beds and repurpose the spent plants. This is our arugula, believe it or not. It doesn't look like much anymore, but if you look really closely, you can see there's these little pods starting to develop. And those are the seeds. So we're just gonna let this go for a bit longer. And once these start to dry up, we'll be able to just break these pods open and pop out all the seeds. And we'll save those to plant next year. And then over here for the spinach, I think if you look closely, all these little bud type things along the stem are gonna turn into seeds. So it doesn't look super pretty right now, but I'm just gonna let it go and see if we can collect some seeds later on. So that is it for garden tasks this morning. I didn't have too much to do. We are on the verge of being able to harvest tomatoes, which I'm really excited about because we just didn't get that many last year. Granted, I didn't fertilize or feed them or anything, so lesson learned, and I've done a slightly better job of that this year. So that'll be soon. We've got eggplants growing, we've got squash growing, cucumbers. We're almost there. Alrighty, I've got my coffee. I am posted up in my temporary office space, aka the dining room, and I'm gonna get some work done, and then I will check back in with you around lunchtime to give you some updates on the office. Whenever I start a project like this, I just try to absorb anything and everything I can, because I often come across tips that make certain little things easier on me that I would never have known otherwise. For example, there are lots of tools that make jobs like this easier, but a lot of them are specialty tools, and I'm not building bookcases and cabinets regularly. You know, maybe a handful of times in my own home we'll build them, but it's not like I own a cabinet business, and quite frankly, I do not want to. But there are some tools that are useful for many projects that will come in particularly handy for this project, and I purchased two. Now, I firmly believe in investing in tools. You don't need every tool. Some tools are a little bit bougie and nice to have, but if there is a tool out there that will make my life easier and it's a low cost investment, because I'm saving money on labor, it's worth it to me to get a tool that will help me along the way. With each project, we try to get a tool or two, and over the years, we continue to collect them, making the next project a little bit easier and our toolbox much more expansive. So the two tools I purchased were both inspired by one of my favorite YouTube channels, Bourbon Moth. He's an incredibly talented craftsman, and if you have an interest in woodworking, he is your guy. The first tool I got are these setup blocks. So they are just cut metal blocks that allow me to more quickly set up certain measurements or measure certain measurements. So they have the markings on them to indicate the size. So for example, we've got a 1/2 inch block, and if I want to dado or cut out a 1/2 inch groove in a piece of plywood, then I can use this block to test my groove and make sure a 1/2 inch piece of material will fit in the groove. Or if I want to set my table saw blade to a 1/2 inch high, I can set this block right up against the edge of the table saw and make sure it's flush with the top of the blade, so I know the blade is at exactly a 1/2 inch. So these will just make some of those measurements and testing a little bit quicker. This set here was about $35 from Amazon. I will include the link to these below. The second tool I purchased are right angle clamps. So these are gonna come in really handy when we're building our boxes, because it's important that our boxes are square. If you're building this freehand, you're likely to be off, which means your box isn't going to be square, and it makes it that much harder to install cabinet doors and drawers that rely on a square box. So these clamp onto two pieces of wood like this and hold them at a 90-degree angle while you're gluing or screwing or nailing these pieces together to ensure that you're connecting them at a 90-degree angle. The third tool that I'm going to invest in for this project is a dado saw blade. A dado blade has an adjustable width, so you can set the width of the blade with adjustable spacers, and that will allow you to create your groove in a single pass, making the whole process faster. It's certainly possible to do it without it, but because this is the third time now that I'm doing cabinetry, I think it's a good time to invest in it so that we can use it for this project and future projects. Now, all that said, I have been sketching and measuring and sketching and measuring, and I am ready finally to calculate the plywood I need for this project. I'm gonna do materials in phases because there's no need for me to buy everything at once, and the plywood is the first thing we're going to need to build all the boxes and the countertop. I am going to record my iPad screen, but I'm also going to put an image of this on screen so you can see it more closely as I walk through it. The first step of this was sketching out the arrangement of shelves and cabinets and the desk. And then I started applying more accurate measurements. I shrunk this full height cabinet and bookshelf to 36 inches. Originally I had it at 48 inches, but that was just too wide, and I felt like two 24-inch doors side by side was way too large, and I really didn't need that much space behind cabinet doors. So we shrunk that down to 36 inches, and I spaced the shelves in such a way that I could accommodate my two printers. So I can fit my large format printer down here, I can fit my LaserJet printer up on this shelf, and those will be tucked away behind two tall doors. And then this upper cabinet will have two shorter doors, so I can store excess office supplies up there, things that I won't reach for very often. These on the right will all be open. Now, a couple of things to note here is that we're looking at this from the front, so everything looks flush. But if I have this in 3D and you rotated it a little bit, you could see that each of these sections are actually different depths. So the cabinet here is 21 inches deep. The countertop is 22 inches deep, so I have an inch overhang, which I think just creates a nice little dimension. It doesn't feel so flat. The cabinet here, from countertop to ceiling, is 18 inches deep. And then these shelves over here on the right are 12 inches deep. I varied the depth for a few reasons. One, 18-inch bookshelves are really deep. Most of the time you're just storing stuff at the front of the shelves, so you're kind of wasting all this space in the back. So there was no point in bringing these out to 18 inches to match this cabinet over here. The cabinet above the desktop is 18 inches, so it's a little bit deeper than the shelves, but not quite as deep as the cabinet below for a few reasons. Most importantly, I wanted a little extra working space when I open these two doors. So as soon as I open them, my printer now has, 4 or 5 inches of extra space on the tabletop to work from. So when I'm working at the printer, I have a little bit of workspace on the left and right and in the front. So that's just a little bonus. And for this cabinet below, I'm thinking of actually doing drawers instead of cabinets with shelves. And I wanted to maximize the depth a little bit because it's the only place we have drawers, and obviously having nothing else to do with the space underneath, we might as well maximize storage space. If you look closely, you can see that I've sort of drawn every individual piece of plywood. So you can see where I'm using a single piece or where I'm layering up with 2 pieces on top of each other to create a thicker shelf. And the reason I do that is because I don't do this very regularly, so I often forget about very simple steps. So it's important to me that I know every single piece I need to cut and where it needs to attach and even how it needs to attach. You can see if I zoom in here, there's a little bit of an overlap here in this corner. That is a place where I'm going to cut a groove and glue them together so it's just a stronger joint. Now, if I didn't draw that, I would honestly probably forget to do that. So I just do that for my own sanity now in the planning stages. Then I can just pull my drawing up and use it as a cut list and sort of a visual reference. Our countertop is going to be 2 sheets of plywood glued together to create a 1.5 inch thick top. Not only does that visually look thicker, but it also is more sturdy. A single piece of plywood at the width I have it can bow in some cases if I put heavy things on it. So I wanted to ensure it has strength and it's not going to bow or bend if I, put another printer on it or I don't know, stand on it. I'm not sure why I'd stand on it, but you never know. So once I had my sketch completed in the gray and I marked out all of the measurements, I then started making a cut list. So I labeled each cut with a letter. So all of my A's are 34.5 inches by 15.25 inches. And then I marked anything that is an A. I will now use these measurements to calculate the plywood I need to buy, but I will also use this as my checklist so I know how many A's I need to cut, how many B's I need to cut, and where those pieces need to be assembled in the end. A lot of this will make more sense as we get into the build, but I did want to share my planning process so you kind of understand how I like to work, and you can take little tidbits of this for your own projects if you would like. The next thing I wanted to show you is how I calculate all of the plywood for this project. So I could just go to the store and buy like 5 sheets of plywood, but I might not need that much or I might need more. And I like to try to minimize waste as much as possible. There is a really cool tool that I found online, it's completely free, that helps you calculate all of your cuts to maximize a single sheet of plywood or a single board. So we're gonna jump over to the computer and I will show you how we do that. OptiCutter is one of the coolest tools I have discovered. I will include a link to it in the description below, but basically they have a number of different calculators for linear and panel cuts. What that means is if you are picking up a bunch of boards or sheets of plywood for a project, you can enter your entire cut list here and it will calculate how many boards you need of each length and where to place the cuts to maximize the boards or the sheet of plywood. I find that really useful because I don't want to spend the time Tetrising all of my cuts together myself. So this does the work for you, and best of all, it's a free tool. First thing you'll need to do is set up a free account. So I'm logged into my account, and then in the sidebar, you'll see a couple of different things. Linear cutting plans are used for calculating board cuts. Panel cutting plans are used for calculating sheets of plywood. So we're going to create a new panel plan, and I will name this Office Plans. The next thing that we really care about is the kerf or blade thickness. This is important because when you cut through a piece of wood, the part that the blade cuts out is actually material removed. So let's say you had a 12-inch piece of wood and you cut it right down the center. You're actually not going to have 2 pieces of wood that are 6 inches. You're going to have 2 pieces of wood that are 6 inches minus the thickness of the blade because that material just disappeared into sawdust. We have approximately an 1/8 inch thick saw blade, so I'm going to enter 0.125 here. And then we're going to jump to the bottom and just use this required panels section. This section is for us to enter our entire cut list. Now, if you remember when I was showing you my drawing, I had all these measurements along the top. Those are all of the cuts I need. I've indicated how many I need of each and what their label is. And that, again, will remind me of where I need to place it when I'm assembling everything. Now, you can see here in the required panels section, they have fields for length, width, quantity, and label. So all these fields can be entered from what I've captured on my drawing. And once I have all of them entered, we can then click Save and calculate the plan. Now I just saved and I totally forgot to add available stock panels. So we're gonna enter 48 inches by 96 inches. And that indicates we're using a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet. I don't think we have to add quantity because it's going to tell us how many, but let's save and see what it does. All right, so now you can see it saved everything we just entered, the blade thickness, the stock panels we're going to be using, and our entire cut list with quantities and labels. The next step is clicking this lovely green calculate button to show us what we need. And this is what it creates. So it is telling us that we are going to need 5 4x8 sheets of plywood in order to make all of the cuts we just entered. As you scroll down, it gives you this awesome visual. It's applied all of my labels. So if you look closely, it's super tiny, but in the center of each of these rectangles, it gives me a letter, which are the letters that correspond with the drawing I created. And it color codes everything so I know what are the same cut and what are unique cuts. So these 2 long red rectangles are the exact same cut, they're just side by side. And then as you scroll down, you'll start to see all of the other cuts and how they kind of Tetris together to maximize the board, which is really cool and super handy. So what I like to do is once I've created this plan, I'll print it out and I'll bring it out to the workshop with me. And as I'm cutting all of these individual pieces, I'll use a marker and cross them off as I cut them. And then I'll transfer the label to the piece of board that I cut. One of the best things about working in a tool like this is that you can save. So if you ever want to come back and add, edit, or remove any of your measurements, you can go into the edit button, you can modify any of those numbers, you can save it and recalculate, and it will generate an updated plan for you. So it saves you the headache of having to redo a lot of work, and you always have this here to reference. So I will continue doing this same process to calculate the MDF and bead board I'm going to use as a backer for the cabinets and shelves. There's a lot less of that material, so we probably only need 1, maybe 2 sheets, but I'll add that into the OptiCutter tool and have that calculate it for me. And then when Matt gets home from work, we will head to the hardware store to pick up materials. I know this was a lot of talking, but I do hope it gave you a little insight into how I prepare and plan for a project like this. There are a million ways to do it, but this just helps me feel more confident going into the project because I have answers in front of me as opposed to like building the plane while we're trying to fly it too. I actually just remembered that I have some leftover plywood from Matt's bookshelf build. So I'm gonna go pull all of that down in the barn because if we can shave off 1 sheet of plywood, that's like 85 bucks and I'm happy to save the money. So let's go see what we have. Good morning and happy Saturday. I am out in the barn just checking on materials to get ready to start building. Last night before Matt and I went to Home Depot, I was able to find a whole sheet of 3/4 inch birch plywood up in the upper level of the barn. So that was great because that saved us like 85 bucks. But we did pick up the rest of the plywood and beadboard that I'm going to use for all of the cabinet structures. And we also picked up a few tools like the dado blade, which will allow us to cut wider grooves, some pocket hole screws, things like that, just to make sure I had everything I needed to get started. While I was sipping on my coffee this morning, I double checked all of my measurements and decided that I'm going to do this build in 3 phases. We're going to build the base cabinet first, just to make sure our measurements are right and get a good system down for cutting. Then we'll build the countertops. Then we'll build the upper cabinets and shelves. I think by then I'll have a good handle on things, so I won't feel as nervous about making all of those cuts. Technically, I have my measurements all marked down. I could cut all the plywood down and have a big stack of things to just assemble, but I'm like 90% sure my measurements are correct, and if they're off, that would just create a whole bunch of extra work. So I figured we'll take it slow, and then the next time I do this, hopefully I'll be a pro. I am gonna wrap the vlog up here so that we can kick the next vlog off with the cabinet builds. Thank you so much for watching this week. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future updates. I will catch up with you next week.